At 5 in the morning on the 6th of March, 1836, about 1,400 Mexican soldiers moved in 4 columns against a crumbling Spanish mission on the edge of San Antonio de Bexar. Inside were roughly 189 men, outnumbered better than 7 to 1. In 90 minutes, every one of them was dead. That much almost everyone knows. Here is what almost nobody does. The men who died inside the Alamo were holding a position that the commander-in-chief of their own army had already ordered destroyed. So why were they still in it? 7 weeks earlier, Sam Houston had sent Colonel James Bowie to San Antonio, carrying a written order for the officer holding the place. The order was not ambiguous. Strip the mission of its artillery. Take anything else of use. Then pull down the walls and abandon the town. Houston's reasoning was cold, and it was correct. The Alamo was a mission compound, not a fortress. Its perimeter ran nearly a quarter of a mile of low walls, built to keep cattle in and raiders out, not to stop an army. A line that long is indefensible without a garrison far larger than anything Texas could put inside it. Leaving it standing simply handed Santa Anna a fortified base on the road into the colonies. Bowie rode to San Antonio, looked at the same ground Houston had looked at, and did not carry out the order. He was not being reckless, and this is the part that matters. He reached the opposite conclusion for reasons that were also correct. That is the shape of this entire story. Almost every man in it was right. That is precisely why they died. The argument that changed Bowie's mind belonged to Lieutenant Colonel James Neill, who was already holding the Alamo when Bowie arrived. Neill's case was simple geography. San Antonio sat on the only practical road from Mexico into the Texas settlements. An army marching north had to come through it, and an army that came through it unopposed would reach the colonies before anyone there knew a war had started. The Alamo was not a good fortress. It was the only one on that road. The compound itself told the other half of the story. The chapel everyone pictures was a roofless ruin in the southeast corner. Its interior braced with an earth ramp the garrison built to drag 3 cannon up to firing height. The north wall, the longest stretch and the one facing the town, was decayed adobe. Green Jameson, the garrison engineer, shored it with timber and packed earth, and it remained the weakest ground they held. Every man inside knew where an attack would come. Bowie was convinced. He wrote to the governor that he and Neill would rather die in these ditches than give the place up, and the two of them went over Houston's head to Henry Smith, the newly elected governor, who approved holding the position. So the Alamo was not abandoned, it was reinforced. Lieutenant Colonel William Barrett Travis arrived in early February with a small detachment of regular cavalry. He was 26 years old. David Crockett, lately a congressman from Tennessee, rode in a few days later with a handful of volunteers. Neill left in mid-February when illness struck his family, and command split awkwardly between Travis, who held the regular commission, and Bowie, who held the loyalty of the volunteers. Their confidence did not rest on the walls. Every man there could see the walls. It rested on a single assumption, and the assumption was reasonable. Texas knew they were there. Texas had an army in the field at Goliad, 90 miles away, under Colonel James Fannin, 400 men strong. Word had been sent. More would be sent. A garrison that could hold long enough would not be a garrison holding alone. They were not defending a fortress. They were buying time until the relief arrived. The relief never arrived. That is the trap, and it is worth stating plainly before the siege begins, because the men inside the Alamo did not know it, and went on believing the opposite until the morning they died. Fannin did try. On the 26th of February, he marched out of Goliad with roughly 350 men and 4 cannon, headed for San Antonio. In 2 days, that column covered less than a mile. Wagons broke down within sight of the fort they had just left. The oxen wandered off in the night. The men discovered they had brought almost no food and very little ammunition. Freezing rain set in. Word came that a second Mexican force under General Urrea was moving in the area behind them, toward the position they had just emptied. Fannin turned around and went back to Goliad. He was not a coward, and by any military reckoning he was probably right. He could not have broken through the Mexican lines with 350 hungry men and no supply. Pushing on would most likely have cost him his command and left the coast open anyway. But nobody rode to San Antonio to say so. Travis went on writing letters to a relief column that had already turned for home. He wrote them for a week. He wrote to Fannin directly. He wrote to the convention at Washington on the Brazos. He wrote to Houston. The letters get shorter as the week goes on, and the substance never changes. The enemy is reinforcing daily. We are holding. Send the men. He was still writing them on the 3rd of March, 3 days before the end, telling the government that he expected Fannin's arrival at any hour. If you're learning something from this breakdown, take a second and hit subscribe. We cover battles like this every week, and you won't want to miss the next one. What follows is 13 days, and the thing to hold in your mind through all of them is that the men inside believed, correctly, that they were performing a job that made sense. Hold the road, buy the time, wait for the column. 2 of those 3 were true. Santa Anna's advance guard reached San Antonio on the 23rd of February, far earlier in the season than anyone in Texas had thought a Mexican army could move. The garrison was caught still gathering supplies. They pulled back inside the Alamo walls with what they had. A blood-red flag went up from the tower of the San Fernando church, visible from the compound. Its meaning was not subtle. No quarter, no prisoners. Travis answered it with a cannon shot. The next day, the 24th of February, Bowie collapsed. The illness has never been identified with certainty, but it took him off his feet permanently and left him on a cot for the rest of the siege. Travis took sole command at 26 years old, with roughly 150 men. That same day, he wrote the letter. It was addressed to the people of Texas and all Americans in the world, and it is one of the few documents of its kind that has never needed embellishment. He wrote that he was besieged by 1,000 or more of the Mexicans under Santa Anna, that he had sustained a continual bombardment for 24 hours and had not lost a man, that the enemy had demanded surrender, otherwise the garrison would be put to the sword, that he had answered the demand with a cannon shot, and their flag still waved proudly from the walls. Then I shall never surrender or retreat. He signed it, victory or death. For the next week, the Mexican artillery worked steadily, moving its batteries closer each night, wearing at the north wall. The garrison slept in shifts and returned fire sparingly. They were short of powder and knew it. They were not short of everything. An irrigation ditch ran through the compound, and they had taken enough beef and corn out of the town to last. What they did not have was men enough to hold the full circuit of wall at once. Travis could stand the north wall properly, or the timber palisade Crockett held between the chapel and the low barracks, but not both at strength. Santa Anna's engineers spent 11 nights making certain he understood which one they had chosen. On the 1st of March, 32 men from Gonzales rode through the Mexican lines in the dark and got inside. Understand what that was. Those men knew the size of the army surrounding the compound. They knew about the red flag. They rode in anyway, and they were the only reinforcement the Alamo ever received. The garrison went from about 150 to roughly 189, and that was the last good news anyone inside would get. On the 2nd of March, 150 miles east at Washington on the Brazos, delegates adopted a Declaration of Independence. Nobody in the Alamo ever learned that the country they were dying for had come into existence. On the 5th of March, the guns stopped. The famous story of what happened next is that Travis drew a line in the dirt with his sword and invited every man willing to stay and die to step across it. That story first appeared in print decades later, from a man who was not present, and no contemporary account supports it. It is almost certainly not true, and it has always been slightly beside the point. Every man in that compound had understood the arithmetic for over a week, and not one of them left. The assault came at 5 in the morning on the 6th of March, in the dark, without a preliminary bombardment. 4 columns, roughly 1,400 men, converged on the walls. The first 2 waves were beaten back with heavy loss, and Mexican officers later described their own men bunching together under fire and shooting each other in the confusion. The third attempt carried the north wall, the same stretch the artillery had been grinding down for 11 days. Travis was killed there, early, shot through the head near his gun position. Once the wall was gone, the compound became a series of separate last stands. The defenders fell back into the long barracks and the church and fought room by room, through doorways they had barricaded with earth and hide. Bowie was killed on his cot. How Crockett died is genuinely disputed. One Mexican officer's diary says he was among a small group taken alive and executed on Santa Anna's order. Other accounts have him falling in the fighting. The honest answer is that we do not know. By about 6:30 in the morning, it was finished. Every armed defender was dead. Santa Anna spared the women, the children, and the enslaved men in the compound. Susanna Dickinson, whose husband had died at the guns, was sent east with her infant daughter and with Travis's slave Joe, deliberately, to carry the news of what had happened to anyone thinking of resisting. It is the single worst decision he made in the campaign. The Alamo cost Santa Anna somewhere between 400 and 600 killed and wounded, many of them veterans he could not replace, to take a position of no strategic value from a force he outnumbered roughly 7-1. He called it a small affair. His own officers did not agree. Colonel Juan Almonte said that another victory like this one would destroy them. Then the story Santa Anna had sent Susanna Dickinson to tell began doing the opposite of what he intended. At Goliad, Fannin was finally caught in the open on the 19th of March, surrendered the next day, and on the 27th of March, his men were marched out of the fort in 3 columns and shot. The number killed is commonly cited at around 400. 2 garrisons destroyed in 3 weeks. It should have ended the rebellion. Instead, Sam Houston, the man who had wanted the Alamo pulled down, spent 6 weeks retreating east while volunteers streamed in from the settlements and from the United States, angry in a way they had not been in February. On the 21st of April, on the plain at San Jacinto, Houston turned and attacked during the Mexican siesta. The battle lasted about 18 minutes. The Texian line went in shouting, "Remember the Alamo and remember Goliad." Santa Anna's army was destroyed, and Santa Anna himself was captured the following day, in disguise, and made to sign away Texas. 13 days at a mission he was told to demolish, and a massacre he was told to advertise, cost him a country. Houston was right that the Alamo could not be held. Bowie and Neill were right that it was the only thing on the road. Travis was right that only reinforcements could save him. Fannin was right that he could not get there in time. 4 correct judgments, and 189 men died in the gaps between them, because nobody was wrong loudly enough for anyone else to hear it. The next entry in this series is another siege, where the relief column was real, was close, and was too late, and where the man in command knew it and kept writing anyway. So what should we cover next? Leave it in the comments, and if you got something out of this, subscribe before you go.